Hello, everybody. Welcome to SJS Podcast. My name is Sam Smith, and my co-host is Sassel Stinson. Let's get right on into it.
So what are your concerns with communism as an ideology? Not as a practice, but as an ideology.
It's not so much a concern. It's more of a, could it happen in this world that we live in now? Many people talk about communism in an unrealistic world or a utopian world. And I think in that kind of element or world that communism could exist and it would do well. But in this world that we live in now, we've seen that human nature and greed, I think, go hand in hand. And I think greed is just part of human nature. And that's sad to say, but a big part of communism being able to work is kind of the absence of greed. And I don't think that this world could have that at this time and point, or if it could ever have it.
Well, if the way I look at it is if there was a world without greed, we wouldn't even need communism. So by virtue of us living in a very greedy world, I feel like this is the perfect time for us needing communism.
I agree, but at the same time, that would take people giving away that greed as an entire country or world, and I think that's impossible.
I think for
go ahead.
the common benefit of survival and for working together, that you do need to be able to live without greed, because you can't live in this world with greed. And I think that capitalism is terrible in that sense, because it, even in the slightest, it allows for some sort of separation. And communism, to me, represents total equality. And I think that in this world, we can't even allow for the slightest bit of inequality. We need to have absolute equality.
I understand, and I totally agree with that wanting or that need to have that in this world. But is that possible, do you think?
Not in this current world, but I think if you took enough steps to strive for that, it could
But what
be.
do you think? What would those steps be to you to make that possible?
Living in a more socialist world to begin with?
But how would that come about?
Like the Bernie Sanders campaign, those are socialist systems he wanted to implement.
I totally agree with that. But the whole thing with Bernie and this country right now is I feel like we're more divided than ever. And I think that's a big problem. And if there is division, how would we come together as an entire country to unite under socialist standards?
Well, I think that
Or would we need to?
separation in our own country isn't caused by any specific ideology. I think it's caused by the people at the top. And that's not just rich people, that's politicians on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a huge issue, because people feel like they're betrayed by their own country right now on both sides.
Yeah, it's both sides. I totally agree.
And I think because there were a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters who decided to vote for Trump because they wanted radical change no matter which direction it went in.
Good point, yeah.
And I think that's a really terrible thing, that people are so hurt and so betrayed that they feel that they need to support a fascist just so they can get some sort of change. Because that's their only hope to have a better life, is to have somebody completely change it. Because right now the status quo is a terrible thing. It's slow, it's progressive in a small sense of the word, but it's very little.
Yeah.
And so I think people do want change, and I think people do want equality. And I know conservatives, they want equality, they want freedom. It's just they looked to that through capitalism, and capitalism in its basic sense should be like that.
Yeah.
It should be offering people that, but it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. But I think the whole thing with people wanting a revolutionary sort of change also comes with different factors, and why. And what's so sad about it is, if a Bernie Sanders supporter is willing to vote for Trump, that takes a lot, and that they must be at a place in their lives where they feel there's absolutely no hope if somebody like Hillary were to become president. And I wouldn't have voted for either one. I didn't really support the values of either one, so I'm not going to be biased with this, because I just want to put my point out there that I wouldn't have voted for either one. I'm just talking through both sides right now.
So, and I think this, like we watched in the video with Tom Morello, is a deeply systemic problem, in that we need internal change by completely changing the system in which we live in, because we have two parties that are pinned against each other that appear as polar opposites, but the people who follow those parties aren't too different themselves. Of course, they're racist and fascist, and they're in the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't judge all of them based off of that, because I know a lot of them want the same things that I want. Maybe they differ ideologically on how that should be accomplished, but I know they don't want racism. They don't want poverty. They just believe the way to accomplish that is through another form.
Yeah, and they feel that, and even if they don't want, the people looking for Trump, why it's so hard and why you shouldn't go into a conversation with someone you don't agree with is because you don't always know the whole story on why they're voting for them.
Yeah.
I know people, and I've heard of people that are voting for Trump solely on the economic prosperity that he promises.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because they're wealthy, or maybe just because they feel they've been ripped off by the country that we have now and the politicians that we have now. And they're poor, and they feel that people are taking their jobs, and they feel that they're losing money. And I think that's a big factor too. And they might not even be racist. They may not be all these stereotypes that we give conservatives and Republicans. And it's the same thing for liberals. And I think that's where it gets kind of dangerous, is when somebody goes into a conversation blindly and starts judging another person or stereotyping them for their beliefs before understanding why or the real reasons that they're voting for a certain person.
Yeah. I think some good will come out this election, because it's going to completely reshape the way we think about politics.
Yeah.
And I think the two-party system is going to be in shambles by the time Trump's done, and hopefully that only lasts 4 years and not 8 years.
Yeah.
But
And we're not even saying that because we're for a liberal president coming in. We're saying that for the good of all people.
Because I think, yeah.
And we're speaking on the side of Republicans and Democrats right now, because we want the good of all people. I look at a Republican and I feel genuinely bad, because I don't want them to be in pain in this country. I don't want to see them go homeless because they can't afford health care or not be able to pay their medical bills. And I see them following blindly into this kind of trap that he's setting, where they think that this is okay. And it's scary, because I see people all over the country now with this whole epidemic of fake news going around. And it really sets the stage for way down the line. It's like, starting now, what down the line could he say that people will believe no matter what? Because if he sets this ideology up that anything bad against him or bad said against him is wrong, and it's fake news, quote unquote, that's really dangerous for this country, because we're going to have people believing anything that this person says, either Trump or anyone in the government.
I just think there are a lot more level-headed people in this country than there are those who support Donald Trump, and hopefully I'm right with that, and hopefully that doesn't turn out to be wrong.
And I don't think the only level-headed people are on one side or the other. I think it's...
No, yeah, because I know people who voted for Donald Trump, they didn't really like him, but they saw he was conservative, and they saw that he was a capitalist, so they supported him for that.
Yeah. And also, the reason why it's so hard to go into a situation or talk to somebody and judge them outrightly is because you don't know the backstory. And I know that's hard to say, because you see somebody's actions, and it's really hard to look at those actions and wonder and realize why when they've just done something bad. And it's hard to look past those things, but when you really do, you start to realize how systemically this country has failed a lot of people. And that goes for people of race, that goes for people of different social classes, that goes for people of every kind of gender or anything in this country. People have been screwed over for anything about them. And I think that's a big factor. And I think people don't look at the systemic, or people who deny those type of things, it can be dangerous as well.
So yeah, I'm really happy about taking social problems this year, because I am learning more and more, and it is making me more sympathetic, making me a more sympathetic person, because I'm able to understand the plight of people and understand that they make decisions based off of what's happened to them in their lives. And I know not always is that a good thing that's happened to them? It's often a very bad thing that's helped shape who they are. And
I agree. Yeah.
and I can see the conservative side. And I think we need to accept who's pinning us against each other. We can't all be puppets and be fighting each other when we have the same master forcing our hands.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on in this country, is we're being pinned against each other for politicians' re-election and for their own well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that by pinning us together, they're going to benefit from it. They don't care about the citizens, be it conservative or liberal. People are getting fucked over.
Yeah.
And I see why people voted for Donald Trump, because they recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted him because he was going to break up the parties. He was going to break up the American government. Granted, that might be regressive in some form. But some good could come out of it, because we can completely see American politics reshaped from the base of it. Because even George Washington said there shouldn't be a two-party system. He didn't think there should be political parties. He said that in his farewell address when he finished his second term as president.
Mm-hmm.
So this has been going on for a while, that people have thought that the two-party system shouldn't work, because my two choices ultimately aren't going to be conservative or liberal for president. There are so many people, so many different views in this country, that following two people isn't in my best interest.
I agree. And I was talking earlier today with somebody about about how over time, to a certain extent, when somebody has been oppressed so much, the people being oppressed start to be the ones to oppress the other people. And I think a huge example of that with the whole Women's March and everything recently, women, I feel like they oppress other women more than men do now. And I really feel like that's because men have been oppressing women over such a long period of time that they kind of do it for us now, which is terrible, because the ones that should be supporting other women are other women. And when women are turning against each other, where does that end up for them? Because if they're oppressing each other, we don't have to oppress them anymore. That just turns into a downward spiral where they're going to have no rights because they don't even think they deserve them soon. With the beauty standards, when other women are attacking other women on how they look, that can be very hard for women growing up around other women who they look up to, telling them that they're not beautiful, or they have to look like this woman in a magazine who's been photoshopped several times. And I think that's really damaging to women growing up in society. I know that that branches off this topic, but it goes back to people in this country feeling so oppressed. The government has, or especially with these two parties now, the two parties have oppressed the other side so much that the voters are taking those roles on, and they're oppressing each other now when we should be more united than ever.
Well, and you can see the same thing throughout history. Anytime that there are oppressed peoples, they always come back. They always attack back, and sometimes that isn't always the best thing, because then they feel that they need to have reprimands for what was done to them, the injustices that they suffered.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why in this country we can't treat anybody poorly, because then you're just asking for problems, and you're asking for long-term problems too, because they're going to feel hurt and they're going to feel like they're oppressed.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot, because they're, and I'm saying this is a majority, I'm saying that this is a minority in that fact, but there are groups of feminists who hate men. Mm-hmm. There are groups of African American civil rights leaders who hate white people. And that's what I don't understand, that, because you're supposed to be fighting the injustice done to you, but then in the end you're doing injustice towards other people.
I agree to a certain extent, but I feel with that kind of situation, especially with the white and black thing, it's really hard to tell them to have their actions like justifiable all the time and act better than us, because we've treated them so horribly for years. And if you've been treated so horribly for years, it's really hard to just say, I'm going to be the bigger person. And everyone in their lives has faced that kind of moment. And that's why it's really hard to expect of them, and every single one of them, to not hate white people at a certain time. And I'm not saying that's right, because it's not right, especially in this country right now. We need people to be accepting of everyone, especially white people, because one should not be better than the other. And if white people are oppressing other people, that's wrong. And it goes the same way. If black people are oppressing white people, they're just doing what we did to them. And one wrong doesn't make a right.
It's the endless cycle.
I know.
And I understand why they do it, but then yes, again, it's a terrible thing to do. Mm-hmm. And that's why I see a lot of times, especially in the Republican Party, we see that the majority of poor people in this country vote Republican, and that seems completely contradictory to the Republican Party's goals, because the Republican Party favors wealthy Americans, and poor people are voting against their own self-interest. Mm-hmm. But then again, I can see why they're justified in that, because they look and they're told that capitalism is the solution to their problems, and that they'll have economic equality because they're able to fight for themselves and make what they earn. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Having said that, it's still very contradictory to their existence, because I wouldn't want to vote against my own self-interest in that sense.
I totally agree. And with Republicans, I feel like their promises are a facade to these people that promote a lifestyle of the lifestyle they have. But that's not the lifestyle that they're going to get, sadly. And that's why we don't judge a certain people, because we understand why they're so mad. We understand that they've gone through a presidency where they have gotten poorer, and they've probably been in the shadows under Obama, and I understand that, and I know how that would feel, because I feel the same way about Trump too. It feels unfair, it feels wrong, and I understand why they're mad. But especially with this Trump presidency, you have to go by actions and not saying. You can't listen to just what they're saying. You have to look at what they've done. You can't let them lie to you, and I know that's hard for some people, especially myself, because those are the people that we think won't lie to us. Our government, they shouldn't be lying to us. And growing up, you think that, oh, our government wouldn't screw us over, our government wouldn't do this, because they're the leaders of our free world. So it's like, why would they do that to us? And when they do, it's very shocking, and it's hard to believe at some points. And I think that's another reason why it's so hard for people to really see what they're doing to us, and why a Trump presidency would damage them economically more than favor them.
One of my favorite quotes is from a song by The Coup, and it's called, and the lyric is, "People only bound back when they're bound back." Mm-hmm. And that's basically just saying that when people are suppressed and when people are treated like shit, they're going to come back, and they're going to be angry about it, and they're going to do something about it. And that's what you see in revolutions, what you see in change, is people who are treated like shit, and then they get angry about it, and they act out in a completely terrible way. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's going to be coming up in this country. People are going to be suppressed. Then people are going to act out of emotion and out of anger, and they're going to do terrible things. And I think that's how Trump was elected.
Yeah. Because
people felt hurt, and then they did something, and they elected this terrible person who's dividing this country even more now.
And it came on so quick, too. Like you were saying, people act in such a fast and drastic way. And I think with the Trump presidency, it was like we had Hillary, and we had all these kind of normal candidates, these politicians, and then Trump came out of nowhere, and people looked back on Obama's presidency and saw, wow, he really didn't help us. He really didn't do all these things. And here comes this person who's promising to be an outsider to these politics. He's never been a politician. He's a businessman. And I need help economically. So it seems obvious to me who they'd vote for. And if they don't hear the things on the news about Trump, or they live in a society where they're surrounded by other Republicans and what they hear becomes their truth, then I can't blame them for voting for Trump. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing with any society. it depends on where you live, is where usually you grow your values from. It's from your parents, it's from your schooling, it's from your teachers, it's from your surrounding. It's everything. And that's why you can't blame people because, well, you can't blame people to a certain extent because when you look at their background, there's a lot of different factors that play into that.
I can only be hopeful for this election that it does change things and it does make it better and it does let us wake up and realize that this government can be so much more than it is now. Yeah. And that's not a liberal and that, or a conservative viewpoint. That's just any viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And I think we do need to get rid of the two-party system.
Yeah.
Because it's not conducive to any American's values.
I agree. The two-party system, it separates people. I really do feel like that's what it really does. I don't feel like that's democracy. Because it doesn't give the people that want to be president a chance. Mm-hmm. Because, especially with, like, as you've seen with the whole Hillary thing, the Democratic Party obviously swayed the election in the favor of Hillary Clinton over Bernie. Mm-hmm. And that's not democratic at all. That wasn't the people's choice.
Because Bernie Sanders, and regardless of whether you're a liberal or conservative, you have to admit that he was kind of the people's voice, at least among liberals, that they did want him and that he did want what the liberals wanted. And you can see that the Democratic Party, that was not in their interest. And that's not what a political party should be at all. It should be about the people's interests that belong to that party.
Yeah.
And I feel like on both sides, it's the millionaires' interests that are represented, the billionaires' interests that are represented. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how you can get rid of a political party, though, because it's so strong and so woven into our identity as an American people that we have Democratic and Republican.
Yeah.
And I don't know, can the government go in and say we're going to eliminate parties? I feel like that would be against First Amendment rights, being able to eliminate a party.
Yeah. And that's where it kind of gets tricky.
Because one of the rights guaranteed in the First Amendment is right to assemble. And I feel like that would be getting rid of the right to assemble. Mm-hmm. But I feel like at the same time, it's very dangerous to our country to have a two-party system. So I think it would be nice to see another political party rise mm-hmm. and kind of represent the voice. But I don't know how they would do that because it's hard for them to get their voice out there. Because we're always paying attention to the Republicans and the Democrats.
Yeah.
And that's the media because we have liberal media and conservative media. Mm-hmm. We need another political party to be able to push past all that and get their voices heard.
And I don't think there should be either type of media because that creates a bias towards one side.
I know.
And that's not democracy because that sways opinions.
It does.
And I think that's very dangerous. And when people say, "Oh, I'm voting Green Party or the Libertarian Party and all those different kind of parties," people make fun of them because it's impossible for a third party to win. And people that vote like that, it's hard to look at that in a way that's positive because the chances of winning is very slim because, as Satchel was saying, it's ingrained in our country. There's a Democratic and Republican Party, and those are always going to be the finalizing parties of the campaign.
I feel like third parties really shot themselves in the foot this year because both Jill Stein and Gary Johnson were absolute jokes.
No, and
of candidates.
And no offense to anyone voting for them, that's your choice. And if you felt strongly about those people, then that's fine. But after listening to their policies, it felt, especially Gary Johnson, it felt like he didn't really know what he was getting into or what he was talking about, and he just kind of sounded very ill prepared for the task that he would have been taking on, which is scary. But also with the two-party thing, another reason why it's so bad is because it doesn't represent the people's voice. Because there are a lot of third-party people that want to vote third-party, but it just seems, it's like, why even vote? Because it's impossible. It doesn't give those people an opportunity to really vote for a person that they want. And so I think if it were possible and the government were to actually do it in a different time, if that was possible to have equal races between parties, then I think that would be incredible because it would shed light on everybody's voice, and it would be very fair to every type of person. And the people that would rise to power would be the ones that the majority of people like.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a person forced by a party because of money and power that the party has, that the Democratic and the Republican Party have too much of, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's very black and white to have a two-party system, because if you look at it, pretty much all the candidates are the same on both sides, with the exception of this election. But, like, if you see, pretty much every Republican that I've ever heard of is against abortion. And I feel like you can be a Republican and be for women's right to choose. And I just feel like, and every Republican is also for gun rights too.
Yeah.
I feel like.
I don't feel like all of them are.
But I'm saying that the lion's share of them are. And
yeah, I agree.
I don't, because I think there can be people, because I've met people before who are like, oh, I'm a pro women's choice, but I'm also against gun control. Mm-hmm. And where does that person go? Because they're stuck between two parties.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are candidates out there who feel the same exact way. Why can't they be represented?
Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing with the Trump election too, because the Republicans didn't really have a choice, honestly, because the people who are angry about the establishment and politicians having huge roles in our government, when Trump came along, there wasn't another option. And I think for a lot of people, I think if there was a more level-headed person that came along that wasn't an establishment person, I think Republicans would have voted for that person instead of Trump. And I feel like a lot of them voted for Trump because that was kind of their only choice. And I may be wrong, but I think that also might be a factor.
Yeah. I don't know. It's tricky. I just hope that some good actually comes out of this election. And I hope that next time we have an election, we can get a more accurate choice.
Yeah. I think something, I definitely think that if anything is good, that has come out of this election, it's been people really understanding what the people want and where our government is right now, in the state that it's in. Especially with what the people really care about in this country, because if you think about it, our election at the beginning was pretty much Bernie and Trump. Mm-hmm. And those are opposite sides of the spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at it without really looking at it, because if you kind of look at it, they pretty much want the same things with different agendas.
I just hope that other people like me can learn to be more understanding from this election, because before I used to hate Republicans with all of my heart, and I used to think that they were the issue in this country. But I don't think that anymore. I think it's politicians that are the issue in this country, because they're the ones controlling our voice. They're the ones controlling our opinions. They're the ones pinning us against each other. And that's not democratic. People shouldn't be able to sway you in one direction or another. Mm-hmm. That's not conducive to a democratic society. Mm-hmm. You should be able to speak for yourself and develop your own opinions.
Yeah.
And I definitely am more open-minded now. And I would really like to have discussions with people who disagree with me. Yeah. That's something that I really look forward to now, because I know that I can approach them in a way where I'm not going to seem like I'm judging their opinions, that I'm more curious to hear what they have to say.
Mm-hmm. And I think over this election and this year, I've really come to the point, and I felt strongly about being able to have civil conversations with people you do not agree with or you share a different opinion with. And I think in this country right now, it's very, very, very hard to do that, because people feel so strongly about their candidate and their decisions with their politics. And I think people don't really come to the realization that it's more healthy to talk about these things than just blindly go into an argument with someone. And I have a perfect example. The other day, I was on Twitter, and this person posted something about Trump. And I commented, because I commented something that I felt strongly about him. And some person commented on mine, and I'm not going to explain the whole thing, but basically it was just back and forth, stupid talk about, it was bashing a party as a whole. And I think that's where we were both kind of wrong, because I tried to go in there using kind of a smart way of talking, because I didn't want to sound ignorant, which in the end I did, because we both attacked People's Party as a whole, and we didn't really question the person that we were talking to. And this kid was attacking me because he thought I was a liberal and that I supported liberals burning down buildings during their protests. And he thought every liberal supported that. And he thought that every single liberal that protests, burns down buildings and does all this. And he thought that no conservatives have ever protested in that sort of manner, and I didn't agree with that. I thought both sides do those type of things, and I told him that I felt for both sides it was wrong to do that, and it is wrong to do those things. But to the point of the story, this kid and I were going back and forth for like 40 tweets in a row, and we were just talking back and forth. It wasn't going anywhere. We were just arguing, and we were just pissing each other off to the point where it was just ignorant talking back and forth between both of us. And it got to a point where I was like, this is not getting anywhere. And so I straight up asked him, I'm like, why do you support Trump? Why do you outrightly support him? I just want to know. And then he said some things to me again that didn't really answer the question. He's like, I'm not going to explain it to you. I don't have to explain it to you. You're not smart enough to hear this. Why would I explain to someone that can't understand a fact or can't do research? And I almost stopped talking right there, but I responded. I'm like, no, you're not answering my question. Why do you vote for Trump? And I honestly wanted to hear his opinion, because what I've learned over this year is I want to be able to have these civil conversations like Satchel was saying, and go into a conversation without judgment or without pre-bias. And I already kind of ruined that. I didn't go into the conversation like that, and it didn't really end like that. But in the actual end, I got him to really talk about it. And he said, well, if you actually want to hear what I have to say, then just message me. And so he messaged me, and he's like, why don't you support Trump? And it led to a great conversation that we basically just wrote paragraphs back and forth about why we support or don't support a certain candidate. And I think that's very important, because if we can go from that point of just talking with ignorance back and forth to having an actual conversation, and us and him and I at the end admitting our faults in the previous tweets and how we were ignorant about just attacking without actually talking, I think that's definitely somewhere to start. And I think if a lot of people can do that, then we'll definitely get somewhere. And I think right now in this election, it's very important to have these conversations, because the more we push people away, the more separated as a country we're going to be. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening in. And if you enjoyed it, check out the next podcast that should be out in a little bit. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, my name is Sam Smith, and my co-host is Satchel Stinson, and this is SJS Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.